Husband living in a remote castle in the Alps with a secret lover and a pack of wolves, and I'm going to tell you exactly how that sentence walked into my mouth and made a home there. I'm Myra, 35, a mountain rescue medic who drinks broth from a thermos that smells faintly of thyme and diesel and keeps spare crampons in the trunk because gravity has a sense of humor, and I know how to say "you're going to be okay" in 3 languages and 5 tones, but none of those tones prepared me for hearing my own husband's voice echoing off stone built before our grandmothers had names for winter. It didn't start as a mystery. It started as a list. Get oranges. Replace headlamp batteries. Call Jonas back. Jonas was my husband, a sound engineer who believed microphones were shy animals and coaxed sound out of rooms the way some people coax secrets out of stubborn friends. He worked festivals in spring, films in summer, and winters he claimed he freelanced, which in our town often means drinking coffee and inventing projects you can describe at parties. We lived at the edge of a valley that folds into itself when fog decides to practice modesty, and our marriage was full of practical kindnesses. He warmed my gloves on the radiator, I untangled his cables, we split the kind of silences people brag about in therapy. 3 weeks before the castle, he was gone when I came off a night shift that had featured a paraglider with more optimism than sense, a woman who'd locked her keys inside her own optimism, and a shepherd with cheeks that told the truth about wind. Jonas's note on the counter was tender in a hurry. Gig up near Brunspitz. Remote lodge. Spotty signal. Back by Sunday. A doodle of a little mountain with a smile. He always drew that mountain, I always pretended it was original. He came back with a new windburn across his nose and a smell in his clothes that wasn't our soap. Not perfume, ice and wood smoke and the expensive edge of a room that believes it's important. He was brighter and softer, the way people get after falling in love with a view they think they discovered on purpose. I asked about the lodge. He said, stone walls this thick, holding his hands an extravagant width apart, and a fireplace that could roast a brag. I asked who hired him. He said, a woman with a voice like the inside of a cello, and I smiled and told the kettle to boil faster because kettles enjoy being bossed around when your brain is looking for something to do besides listen. 2 days before the castle, I picked up a call-out I wasn't supposed to take because I was technically off, but an avalanche doesn't consult calendars. A skier had ducked a rope and paid tuition to the University of Consequence. We went up with shovels and stubbornness and found him wooden but viable, and afterwards I sat on the tailgate of the truck letting my bones reconsider their contract with my muscles, and my phone finally found the courage to deliver texts that had been orbiting a dead zone. One pinged open by itself, an audio file mislabeled the way Jonas labels when he's in a hurry. Room test 3 above, he must have airdropped it to me by mistake. He does that, his pockets are full of ghosts that like to jump networks. I put one bud in my ear because the other ear was still listening for something to worry about. The file opened with room tone, every room has a hum and this one had stone in it. Then a voice. Again, a woman said, and she didn't sound like the inside of a cello, she sounded like someone who has practiced being obeyed without raising her volume. Jonas laughed, the laugh he saves for when he wants to be the easiest person in the room. Again, he agreed, and then there was a sound I can't give you in writing. Fur on stone, breath in cold pads crossing ancient floor. The hair at the back of my neck negotiated a new wage. The woman murmured something in a dialect that doesn't show up in phrasebooks, and a low answer came from a throat that hadn't learned words because it didn't need them. Good, the woman said. They like you. I sat absolutely still while my pulse counted all the times I had been wrong without being informed. When the file ended, my phone continued to pretend to be a phone. I put it in my pocket as if pockets can keep the past from catching up, and I drove home without speeding because that's how you lose more than you came for. In the kitchen, Jonas was slicing bread as if bread had hurt his feelings, but he had decided to be mature about it. I said, room test. The knife paused in its work. He glanced up. That microsecond of startled guilt should be illegal, so intimate it makes you feel like you kissed a stranger by accident. You weren't supposed to get that, he said, and the sentence had the foolish courage of a man who thinks technology is an accomplice. I held his gaze long enough for the machine of our life to shiver. He said it faster, like speed could save him. It's a commission. Sound library. Wildlife in old architecture. They want predators for the contrast with stone. He smiled, that tiny ask-for-trust smile, and I understood, as if a small hand had pulled back a curtain, that the next move belonged to me, and the move after that would belong to the part of me that still believed emergencies arrive with sirens. I said, "Where?" He said, "You don't want to go," which is a grammar I've learned to interpret as, "I don't want you to go." "I'm mountain rescue," I said. "I want to go everywhere." He exhaled. "South face of the Hollenberg," he said at last, and the name unpacked itself from my childhood stories. The Hollenberg isn't on tourist maps. It sits back from the ridge like a patient animal. The locals call it the keep the wind couldn't kill. The legend is silly, nuns and wolves and a baron with a moral allergy, but the stone is real, and the storms that roll their shoulders against it are not in need of character development. The way to the Hollenberg in winter is a scarce old road and 3 choices you'll regret. "I'm coming," I said, like a person discussing dinner, and his jaw made a shape that means yes in the language of surrender. We left before dawn, which is when truth enjoys stretching without an audience. Jonas drove. I watched the world teach itself light or dark. We crossed in and out of cell coverage the way breath goes in and out of a body. He told me fragments about the woman. Her name was Helena. She had inherited the castle from an uncle who preferred bookkeeping to people, and she ran a conservation project for high-altitude wolves. I didn't correct him. Wolves don't need saving from altitude. They need saving from us. We parked where the road decided it had tried hard enough and loaded the sled. His case of microphones looked like it might contain diplomatic relations. My kit looked like what it was: bandages, drugs, rope, a stove that believes in soup. We climbed. The day settled into the kind of cold that respects labor. Far below, the valley put on fog the way some people put on a sweater when they'd rather sleep. The castle revealed itself in stages. A watchtower first, then the long shoulder of a wall, then the main keep, black windows practicing opinions. When we reached the gate, my breath mispronounced itself. An iron ring the size of a child's head hung from a door so old it was probably apprenticed to a tree before it got the job. Helena opened it herself. She was not dramatic. She was precise. Mid-40s maybe, tall without trying, hair in a braid that made the word utilitarian feel underdressed. Her eyes did that scan good leaders do, counting heads, counting hands, counting the distance between your posture and your truth. She smiled as if that counted for something and stepped aside. The entrance hall was shadow and heat. To the left, a fireplace chewing on oak in an educated way. To the right, a row of harnesses hung like arguments that had been settled. The smell in the air was clean, smoke and wool and faintly of raw meat handled properly. "Welcome," Helena said, and I wished pointlessly that her voice would be easier to dislike. "We keep the upper rooms closed in winter, but the west wing is warm. Boots off or on with covers, the stone has opinions about grit." Jonas moved through the space like it had been practicing for him. He lifted a microphone to the air and smiled at the room the way you smile at a dog that might remember your name. Helena watched him the way people watch men they've decided to be tender with. I kept my mittens on because my hands didn't know what else to do with themselves. We passed under a gallery where a portrait of a woman looked down with the faintly amused expression of someone who knows everyone in the room will eventually be dead and finds it freeing. A wolf padded along the far wall, silent as a plan. It looked at me and didn't find a reason to look again. I was grateful for the insult. We set up in the great hall. Jonas disappeared into that ritual he loves: cables, stands, the careful negotiation of sound with space. He bent to tape a wire in a way that bared the back of his neck, a vulnerability that turned my temper into something with edges I didn't trust. Helena stood beside me, 2 meters of mountain etiquette pretending to relax. "You don't like castles," she observed. It wasn't an accusation, it was a weather report. "I like rooms that haven't learned to echo," I said. She smiled. "You like rooms that forgive." Something answered from the passage behind us, a soft chuff, a wave of muscle. 2 wolves entered, ghost pale against the shadow, eyes the color of tea left too long. They didn't glance up like props waiting for cues. They moved around Jonas as if he were furniture that had decided to behave. He looked at them with his good, quiet face, and one of them tilted its head just enough to admit that sound might be interesting as a hobby. "How many?" I asked Helena, because numbers give fear a place to sit. "8 in the main pack," she said. "2 juveniles with opinions. 3 more who use the perimeter when the wind says yes. We've lost 10 over the years to traps and stupidity and the kind of men who think killing is a way to belong to a landscape. We try not to make the wolves into myth, and we fail at a rate that still lets them eat." I looked at Jonas. He wore the expression he saves for perfect takes, the mix of humility and pride that violinists wear when their hands do exactly what they told them to do. He didn't reach for Helena. He didn't have to. It was in the axis of their attention, the way they kept checking the same part of the room without looking at each other. I have been in enough rope teams to recognize synchronization. You can't fake it. You can only fall into it and pray you land with most of your bones intact. Work has a way of delaying disasters until they become logistics. I helped where I could, held a directional MIC at a height Jonas couldn't maintain while also coaxing a wolf to walk past a slate wall, recorded ambient outside while snow sifted from a gray sky like the valley was being sifted for sugar, boiled broth on the stove and handed mugs to men who pretend to disdain soup. At dusk, Helena led the pack to the east courtyard where the wind likes to make stairs out of air. She called softly, nothing dramatic, just names. Of course she'd given names to creatures that don't need them. That's what we do when we want to love without permission. "Come," she said, and the wolves came, and I understood in a bone-deep way that I wasn't angry at a woman with a castle and a profession. I was angry at the way my husband turned toward her voice like it was the kind of gravity that sounds don't have to negotiate. I stood very still while the cold made a treaty with my face. That night we ate in a side room that used to be a chapel and now hosts a table that believes in conversations. There were 6 of us, Helena and her assistant, a quiet man with forearms like river rocks, a biologist who had learned to make jokes about scat without dying inside, the cook who introduced herself as Ulrika and fed us stew that restored my faith in root vegetables, Jonas, whose mouth had located its most charming version of itself, and me, a woman holding a spoon and a set of freshly broken narratives. The talk skipped. Fieldwork is essentially storytelling with weather. People traded myths of old winters, new laws, hunters caught because their truck had opinions about mud. Helena listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, she angled her sentences so people walked out of them with their dignity intact. After, Jonas took me down a side passage that felt like it had been excavated out of a rumor. He leaned against the wall and said, "I wanted to tell you. I didn't know the tense." I stared at his face in the torchlight and thought of all the times I had told strangers to move toward me, toward safety, and they had listened because my voice had learned the shape of command without making it cruel. "Tell me now," I said, and he did. He told me about the first day he came up with a producer who hated heights and refused to admit it, about the way Helena had handed him a cup of something hot without asking his name and then remembered it anyway, about the sound of a wolf breathing on the other side of a door that had taught itself how to be quiet. He told me about the second day and the week after and the week after that. He did not say he had slept with her. He didn't have to. It was in the verbs he avoided. "You always fall in love with place first," he said, as if that excused nouns. "Do you love her?" I asked, because sometimes you need the blunt instrument of an answer. He closed his eyes and opened them. "I love who I am in that room," he said. It wasn't enough, and it was too much. I walked away from him because some conversations can only be had with your heart rate under a certain number. I found Helena in the courtyard tying a strip of cloth to a post. The wind had been rewriting her flags all week and she was patient with its revision. I said, "This is where you tell me you didn't mean to." She tied another knot. "I meant to hire him," she said. "The rest I didn't plan. I don't plan much except feedings and field days and firings when they're necessary." "Do you love him?" I asked, surprising both of us with my lack of drama. She considered the mountain, which is a person to me and a god to some and a contractor to men who build roads. "I love that he brings the room its own air," she said. "I love that he is gentle with creatures he does not get to command. I don't love complications." She turned to me fully then. "You are not a complication," she said. "You are the fact. If you tell him to go, he goes." We both watched a wolf circle a column in a figure 8 full of grammar. What do you want? I asked her, because sometimes the war ends when both generals admit they'd rather build bridges than statues. She shrugged, an elegant, callous thing. For the pack to survive. For the foundation to renew our grant. For the roof to stop pretending it's heroic when it leaks. For my people to get paid enough to take their mothers to the dentist. For winter to finish teaching us humility without demanding a student we didn't volunteer. And Jonas? I pressed. She looked at me with an expression I recognized from my own mirror after long nights. For him to choose without making choosing into a theater. The next morning, a storm shouldered the ridge and shook its wet coat over everything. We hunkered. The wolves slept in a pile like forgiveness. Jonas recorded wind trying to play the battlements as if they were instruments. I took stock of the bandages and boiled water and wrote 3 letters in my head to 3 different versions of myself and mailed none of them. Around noon, a radio crackled an emergency. 2 snowboarders off route near the glacier tongue, 1 injured, 1 panicking in the key if I didn't think it could happen to me. I was already lacing my boots when Helena said, "You can't even see the path." I said, "Then I'll make one." Jonas grabbed his pack because he is not brave in the cinematic way, but he is brave in the carrying gear way that saves actual lives. The assistant, Radu, checked a rope as if checking it might remind it to hold. We went out into a grey that had calibrated itself for dramatic effect. The castle disappeared behind us like a stagehand turned down a dimmer. Storm rescue is not peak Instagram. It is crawl and curse and check each other's knots every 4th breath. We found them by voices, young men, the swagger kicked out of them by physics, the injured one with a leg that had decided to become 2 legs where it should have been 1. We did the work. Splint. Hypo kit. A helicopter couldn't fly in that, so we hauled the litter together, a 4-person animal that moves only when all egos agree. Jonas on the rear, me at the head, Radu pacing the route into a line we could argue with. At one point the wind tried to take the stretcher and Jonas sat down hard, anchoring us with his body like a period at the end of a dangerous sentence. By the time we saw the gate again, no one had the energy to be anything but human. Helena met us with blankets and soup and the calm you yearn for as a medic from anyone who isn't you. We put the boys by the fire and fed them endings to their story that didn't include funerals. Jonas's mouth was blue at the edges. I knelt in front of him and shoved a mug into his hands. He tried to smile, it was crooked and true. "I forgot you in your hero coat," he said, teeth chattering just enough to make the vowels charming. "You forgot I wear it," I said, and the line landed between us, heavy with more than weather. That night, after the storm chose another victim somewhere else, I told Jonas to pack. He didn't argue. He is smarter than his mistakes by at least a day and a half. We thanked Helena for the shelter. She thanked me for the boys in a tone that had nothing performative in it. At the threshold, she offered her hand and I took it because my mother taught me to accept dignity when it's offered. "If you ever need the hall for a wake or a wedding," she said, "the door opens." "That's too generous," I said. "It's too human," she corrected gently. We descended in a light that pretended last night was rumor. The valley yawned like a house with all its windows open. At the car, Jonas set his pack down and said, "I'm sorry," in the uninteresting way, and I laughed because uninteresting apologies are the ones that quietly change a life. "You can't come home and be both missing and present," I said. "Choose." He nodded. He put his forehead to the steering wheel like prayer. "I choose you," he said hoarse. "But I can't choose you if I have to stop choosing who I am when rooms echo." I considered this absolutely terrible and possibly adult answer. "Then build studios in the valley," I said. "Teach the rooms down here to listen." The weeks after were paperwork and plumbing and therapy. He moved into a friend's spare room for a while because changing the air matters. I worked my shifts and stopped asking my phone to be prophetic. He wrote Helena and told her he couldn't come back. She wrote back, he showed me, and that mattered, wishing him wind that didn't lie and a roof that remembered why it was built. He sent her drive folders with sound he had already captured. She sent him a list of schools for kids up valley who had never touched a microphone and might like to bully their own voices into art. We did not erase anything. There isn't a solvent for past. We did the smaller thing, rearranged. We used the table leaves we'd never used. We learned to say in this room when we meant in our marriage and outside when we meant we need air that isn't an argument. Sometimes at night when the wind runs its teeth over the eaves, I think of wolves moving through stone like stories no one gets to own, and I am grateful for their indifference. It means my life is not their lesson plan. 3 months later, I took a school group on a glacier walk. We tied them to each other with ropes they treated like decorations. I taught them how to step in rhythm and pay attention. One girl asked if wolves would come. I said, "They are busy not thinking about us," and she looked disappointed until the ice cracked loudly enough to wake her curiosity with a spoon. On the way back, my phone found enough signal to burp up a photo from an unknown number. The castle in summer. The west wall draped in green. A new roof tile pattern like a healed scar. No caption. I didn't show Jonas. Not because I'm hoarding pain, but because that image belongs to a version of our life that doesn't live here anymore. I tucked it into a folder in my head called Places That Continued to Exist Without Me, which is a healthy folder if you keep it dusted. If you need an ending, here's mine, deliberately small because I trust small things not to break as often. Yesterday, Jonas recorded our neighbor's choir in the church with heat-noisy radiators. He rigged a blanket so the soprano wouldn't squeak the pew with her coat. He came home smelling of beeswax and old wood and pride he'd earned in a room that forgives. I came back from a call where the only thing I had to do was tell a man that fear was allowed and check the batteries in a headlamp while he cried very quietly about a business he was losing to a landlord who had learned extraction as a hobby. We ate omelets with too much dill. He said, "Upstairs," which in our new grammar means, "Would you like to be ordinary with me in a way that makes it easy to wake up tomorrow?" I said, "Upstairs," and we went, and outside the wind ran along the ridge and somewhere higher wolves threaded between stones older than every oath we've ever sworn. And no one added a moral except the mountain, which continues to say the same thing it has always said: hold, let go, and we continue badly and then better to try.